At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, we have a little chat before we record this, which will come as a surprise to some people, but I can tell even this far away, you're on tenterhooks. I can hear you jumping from foot to foot, Kieran.
Well, yes, it's Brighton's first ever chance to get into Europe. Well, not our second ever chance, but first was in fact 40 years ago today.
Was it?
We're recording this on the Sunday. The FA Cup final 1983, and Smith didn't score, and I honestly thought that was it. But it's I am very, very nervous indeed.
40 years ago today. I'm normally good at putting that day in my diary. Annual Laugh at Brighton Day. You'll be fine. You're playing Southampton, Kieran. You'll steamroller the Southampton kids, won't you?
I'm starting to panic.
Why are you panicking? Apart from the fact that's a Smith song, Kieran. Obviously, it's clear that your tribute to Andy Rourke, as sad loss to us all, was going to be crowbarring Smith songs in. I've made a list of a couple of obscure ones just so I can keep up with you. It's Questions Day, Kieran, but there's one big news story I want to discuss because it's annoying me a little bit. I have to say, I'm over Jurgen Klopp a bit now, and he was fined £75,000 this week, 2-game ban. A lot of people are expecting more, but he's getting a bit sniffy about where the money might go if he decides to pay it, Kieran.
I don't think he'll have a choice with regards to paying it. That is a decision which is made by the Football Association, and if nobody else can determine the recipient of the money, then I'll be very surprised if Jurgen Klopp can have a special rule just for him. So, we all know that referees make decisions we don't always agree with, but. We've had referees on the show. I used to referee myself. You make a decision in good faith. Players cheat, and players are coached to cheat as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just find it a bit strange anybody sort of trying to take any high ground on this.
Well, it's the fact. It's the arrogance, Kieran. He behaved very badly in front of the TV cameras, and now saying, "Well, I might pay the fine. I might not. I want to know where the money's going." It's not up to you, mate. And I know he's a Liverpool legend, Kieran, but frankly, Mr. Shankly wouldn't approve. That's my one for the day. That's over and done with. Pretty much the only reason we did the Jurgen Klopp story, Kieran, so I could get one in. Now, our first question comes from Marcus Makin, and we were discussing just yesterday after the Fulham game, if any player deserves a testimonial, it's Joel Ward for Palace. But Marcus Makin says you don't tend to hear of too many testimonials these days. It used to be a way of a player being given a payday for being such a good servant to the club. Do players still have to give players testimonials after 10 years? And can you have one if a player's been at a club for less than 10 years?
The original purpose of testimonials was to effectively have a parachute payment for football players as they transitioned from being a professional athlete towards what you might call civilian life. And also, it was a chance to say goodbye if a player had been at a club for a long period of time. As far as the financial implications are concerned, clearly players in the Premier League are very well remunerated. The average salary around about £2.7 million a year. But there was a tax change in 2017, which meant that having a testimonial was no longer as beneficial as before. And the change was brought in. And part of this was a populist activity. Footballers are easy targets. Previously, the testimonial income had been effectively ring-fenced and tax-free, but the changes that were brought in meant that any money over £50,000 had to be taxed, and national insurance was paid on top of that as well, which meant that the player would get less of it. Now, if you are a League One or a League Two player, £50,000 is still a substantial amount of money. So they still do exist. I mean, to be fair to many of the elite players, they do still have testimonials, and they have the proceeds going to charity, which is great. Raising money for a good cause, and fair play to them for that. But I think the other challenge is that the football clubs themselves, that they know they want the players to disappear on holiday as soon as the season finishes.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that they want them back as early as possible because they can make loads of money out of them on pre-season tours. So it's becoming more and more difficult to arrange. You've got the stadiums are being used for different purposes, concerts and so on. You've got the groundsman who is instantly grumpy as soon as any opportunity arises. And if you say, "Oh well, 2 weeks after the season ends, we're having an additional match," it'll give you the full grumpy looks there. So they do exist. They're not as common as before because there tends to be more transitions as far as players are concerned. You don't have to be there for 10 years, but it would normally be that if a player has been at a club for quite a few years, it could be as part of the contract negotiations for an extension of the contract that a testimonial is brought into it.
Yeah, groundsmen are born grumpy, Kieran. I think pretty much what happens is that football club owners go around primary schools and pick out the grumpiest 5-year-old kid they can find and train them to be a groundsman. It's an indication of what a delightful man Julian Speroni is and what a wonderful person he was as a Palace player, that when he was offered a testimonial, Steve Parish told me this story himself. Steve said, "You pick any team you want, Julian. We'll sell out Sellers Park. You can have Barcelona, we'll have Real Madrid." And Julian Speroni went, "No, I want Dundee." Because that was the club. That was the club that gave him his first break in English football, Scottish football. I beg your pardon, British football. I'm going to try and claim that was a Smiths lyric now to get myself out of geographical trouble. So no, he wanted, and he chose Dundee, and probably lost about 50,000 quid out of it because we didn't sell Sellers Park out. But it was a cracking evening. Paul Downton has our next question. Paul says it's an interesting one. In light of fans of 14 Premier League clubs believing, rightly or wrongly, I'm going to go rightly, Paul, that there is a perceived bias towards 6 clubs in terms of officiating and money in order to help stave off a potential breakaway to pastures new, it occurred to me that what would happen if those 14 clubs actually said, "Stuff this, we're getting a bum deal, we've had enough, we're breaking away back to the EFL." Would it be legal and would it be financially viable? Because it's never going to happen, Kieran. But we talk so much about the top 6, possibly the top 7 with Newcastle. Eventually, inevitably, one day in decades to come, breaking away. So what if the others just say, "Right, we'll do it first"?
Well, if we take a look at the Premier League handbook, you've got to have 14 clubs voting for any changes. So I think with Newcastle potentially now being part of the elite group, given the change of ownership, it would be very difficult because I can't see more than 13 clubs ever voting for something. So I think we are going to have but I was actually talking to somebody very, very senior in football a few days ago, and the subject of super.
Finley doesn't like it when you name drop. It's not that you name drop; you don't drop the actual name, Kieran.
And we came to the conclusion that whilst we both loathe Super League, probably the best thing for British football is for those 6 clubs to have set up their own competition and to be excluded from domestic football. Perhaps they can play in the FA Cup.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that it is financially impossible to break into the Big 6. When Leicester City won the Premier League in 2016, the response of the Big Six clubs was to force through, under threat of creating a Super League, was to force through changes in the way that the TV money is distributed so that they got more and the smaller clubs got less. So therefore, in monetary terms, the gap between the Big Six and the other 14 now averages £300 million, which is, it does make it difficult to hold on to your best players. You might be able to hold on to one. You've got Wilfried Zaha, and we've spoken about his contract and so on, off it. You might be able to do it with one player, but you're not going to be able to do it with three or four. You're not going to do it with enough players to form a squad that can be genuinely challenging. So could you have 14 clubs? Yes. Would it be legal? I suspect there would be a legal challenge, and our silver-tongued friends would be asking themselves, how this would go through the system. Would it be financially viable? I don't know. I mean, you've only got to look at the fact that Bradford City are getting 22,000 people turning up in the fourth tier of English football to know that from an attendance point of view, the numbers are looking really strong. But from a broadcast point of view, whilst there is, I think, resentment from many fans in respect of the amount of attention that the Big Six clubs get, or the rich six clubs, they're not big. Spurs haven't won anything since, they've not won the league since 1962. So I think it would not be financially sensible to do. And in terms of Paul's belief that there is a perceived bias towards six clubs, I'm going with the wrongly. As much as my teeth gnash, Liverpool had a goal disallowed yesterday, for example, at home to Villa. But it's there is certainly a case for saying to those clubs, if you want if you want to join a competition where you don't have to win football matches to be part of it, go away, form your own Super League, and a Premier League with Leeds, Newcastle, Villa, West Ham, Palace, Brighton, Forest, Derby, Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield United, Birmingham, potentially Rangers and Celtic could come down as well, and that would be a completely separate issue, would actually have far greater unpredictability. And as fans, we would acclimatise to it very quickly.
I presume you're going to divulge the name of this high-ranking official after we stop the recording, Kieran. So till then, I'll just stretch out and wait. Was it 62 or 61 Tottenham last?
62.
It was 62. Okay,
yeah.
Wow. So it's an interesting argument, though, Kieran, because there are quite a few of our Scottish friends who posit the theory that the Scottish League would be better off without Rangers and Celtic, which is always one I've found difficult to agree with, because certainly competitively they would, but financially you can't imagine that the crowds would go up high enough to make up for the loss of playing those clubs 4 times a season.
Yeah, I mean, what difference does it make? Well, financially, it would be significant, and we've also got the Scottish TV deal, which is very much driven by the appeal of Rangers and Celtic. And we've got Neil Doncaster coming on the show shortly, and I think the Scottish TV issue, I suspect, will be one of the areas where listeners have sent in questions.
Our next question comes from Joan Taylor, and it's pertinent to a subject we've been talking about quite a lot recently, Kieran. Joan says, on a recent show, you mentioned Peterborough's debt as being 13.5 million, mainly due to the owners, or mainly owed to the owners, I should say. Joan says, I'm a Leeds fan that got interested in Peterborough when they launched a fan bond earlier in the summer. The document there stated that only about half of the debt was to the owners, and the rest is some sort of hedge fund called Old Kent Road Financial, which I believe was Uncle Terry's original company, was it not?
Yes.
So Jones says, I presume this means Old Kent Road will be charging interest then. Do they get theirs first? And is it the same amount as the bond? Have I actually found something strange, or is this all quite normal?
Well, first of all, Joan, well done for doing the hard yards on this.
Yeah.
Peterborough have taken out a number of loans in both November 2022 and March 2023. And those loans are what we refer to as secured loans. So it's the equivalent of mortgages. We've also got this relationship with Old Kent Road Financial. Now, Old Kent Road Financial is a dormant company. It doesn't appear to be doing anything. But if you take a look at its registered address, it just happens to be Peterborough's football ground. So it's all a little bit circular and uneasy. Peterborough, in their 2021 accounts, and they've done a bit of a circumvention in delaying their 2022 accounts, which I personally think is well out of order.
Yeah.
Given that they have asked fans in good faith to buy into the posh bond, then in my view, they owe those fans, who are now stakeholders, they owe those fans a duty of care and to be treated in a more decent manner. And for the sake of transparency, I've bought into the posh bond. Yeah, so and I can add up and sort of do some sums. But the interest on the loans that Joan referred to, those were £700,000 in 2021, and since then the quantum of the loans has gone up. The secured loans would be paid in priority to the unsecured loans, and this is the risk that you have with something such as a posh bond. And we've had successful ones at Norwich and at QPR. Wimbledon have their own. We've just seen Bolton launch theirs. They do pay a good rate of interest, but they are unsecured, and they come with that risk. There is some protection for people that have bought those bonds. They can't be used to repay existing debt. They've got what we refer to as a change of control clause, such that if a new owner comes in, let's say Lawrence Bassini rocked up at Peterborough and they sold him the club, the first thing I'd be wanting to do as a lender is getting my money out of that club as soon as possible. So there is a degree of protection there, but it's still an unsecured loan. So it's a funny one, and I'm a bit twitchy with regards to Peterborough because the stadium company's been put into receivership. There's talk from Darragh McAntony that there's nothing to worry about, but I'd rather see actions rather than talk.
This notion that it can't be used to pay off existing debts, is that a law or is that a football regulation? Because
that's a condition of the loan. So
right.
if you go through the small print of the posh bond, and this is there to protect those fans who love the club and want the club to progress. There has been talk about moving to a new ground. The club has said specifically that the money raised from the bond would be used for effectively infrastructure, capital expenditure projects,
right?
Training facilities, better academy, and so on. So that is actually laid out in the small print of the bond itself, but it's not actually a legal thing. The law is very, very relaxed when it comes to individual lending arrangements, as Uncle Terry will confirm.
Indeed. I've always liked the name Joan. In fact, I love the name Joan because my aunt Joan, God rest her soul, was the nicest, kindest person you could meet. But I'm now slightly worried, Kieran, that given our demographic, it might actually be Juan Taylor from Barcelona. Well, if it is Joan, then Joan, please get in touch because it's lovely to hear from you. Jonathan Wright.
There's not many people from. Yeah, but are there many people from Barcelona with the surname Taylor?
No, that's a fair point. Unless it's Taylor, which is
very, good, could be.
It's very unlikely, Kieran, isn't it? Thank you for your question, Joan. Jonathan Wright says the Premier League hasn't had a title sponsor for a while now, so I'm guessing it's not something that is deemed to be as lucrative as it must have been in the past. Is there a particular reason for this? What's stopping the Premier League from accepting a title sponsor? And are they open to the idea in future? It seems an odd source of income to refuse.
Well, I think you've raised an interesting question here, Jonathan, and I'm glad that you brought it up. The Premier League made a conscious decision to not have its product with a main sponsor. And the reason for that is that it decided that the sum of the parts, by having a series of small sponsors, would be greater than the whole. And this has been borne out that if you go to the Premier League website and you ferret around the back pages, which of course is the type of place I like to ferret.
That sounds like one of your Viz euphemisms, Kieran. You spent a week ferreting around the back pages.
You'll find that in 21-22, the Premier League actually generated £136 million from what they refer to as central sponsors. So we now have an official beer of the Premier League, which is Budweiser. Right. But they didn't want Budweiser to sponsor the Premier League because that has potential issues in terms of some of the export markets of the Premier League. If you're going to those countries in which alcohol is prohibited. EA Sports sponsors the Premier League. We've got Nike has the official football. Castrol is the official motor oil, which I didn't know there was an official motor oil of the Premier League. Hublot is the official timekeeper. And finally, we have Oracle, which is the official cloud partner of the Premier League. I wake up in the morning and say, do I need an official cloud partner? Well, apparently I do. So this money is split evenly. And this is one of the areas where the Sneaky Six have not yet managed to say, well, that's only down to us. Give us more of it yet. But when it comes to the Premier League, these things take time as far as the big clubs are concerned, and I'm sure that they will be pressing the Premier League. So that's one reason, and the other reason is that it can lead to conflicts between the Premier League and the clubs themselves. So we've seen in Scotland where they've got Kazoo as their official partner of the SPFL, but Rangers didn't like that because their former chairman owned his own car company. And so therefore, if you had, let's say the Premier League went back to being supported by Barclays, you've got Liverpool being sponsored by Standard Chartered. That's another financial services company. You've got Brighton being supported by American Express. That's another financial services company. And those clubs would say, look, our sponsors are a bit cheesed off. So the Premier Leagues just say, right, we'll concentrate on having small partners who together, clubs are making £7 million a year from these deals. That's the equivalent of what the clubs, a club like Brighton or Palace is probably getting from their front of shirt sponsorship. So by having these smaller partners for the Premier League itself, it's actually generating a lot of money and not having an overall brand. And the Premier League also believes that its own brand is so big and so valuable, it doesn't need to be tainted by that of another commercial partner as a senior partner. I mean, it's not the Coca-Cola FIFA World Cup, for example, is it? And people wouldn't accept that.
Do you know what? I feel quite miserable. I haven't got an official cloud partner. That's a concept that's never occurred to me, and now I feel like half a person. No, do you know what? Do you know who I'd like to see sponsor the Premier League here? Manscaped. I'd love to watch Match of the Day on a Saturday night and say Gary Lineker saying, and first up in the Manscaped Premier League, Jared Gritt has a little insight into his home life here, Kieran.
Yes,
which I suspect is a home life that you would thoroughly approve of.
Yes, I'm high-fiving him.
Jared says, my partner and I were having a deep and intense and nerdy conversation about football. Is there any other sort? And she asked if I knew whether youth players are protected by a rule similar to the Jackie Coogan law in the States, in which 50% of a child actor's earnings are put into trust account until the child comes of age. As footballers an industry employing so many youths, often from disadvantaged backgrounds, surely some sort of pot similar to the aforementioned would provide some, albeit small degree of financial protection to those who may be vulnerable to financial exploitation and abuse. And I'd like to say, Kieran, that 14 and 15-year-olds in this country weren't subject to financial exploitation and abuse in football, but I'm not sure I could say that with a 100% conviction. So this is a very interesting question.
Yes, and for those people not familiar with the Jackie Coogan law, Jackie Coogan was a child actor. His parents were involved in the theatre as well, and he was discovered by Charlie Chaplin, and he became a child star, and he earned around about $3 to $4 million, and his finances were actually being looked after very sensibly by his father. And his father and two other relatives were then killed in a car crash. I think it was in 1919. And his mother remarried a financial advisor. And the financial advisor spent all of the money on fur coats and diamonds and holidays and such. And when Jackie Coogan found out, he tried to effectively sue them, and he got a little bit of money back. So this law was introduced to provide an element of protection, and it's not a huge amount of protection because, let's face it, 15% of your earnings is going into this pot. That means the other 85% isn't.
Yeah.
But as far as, and Jackie Coogan, he married Betty Grable. That's fun fact of the day. But he didn't get very much money from it in the end, and what little money he did get, he invested in the business, and that business sadly failed as well. As far as footballers are concerned, they are not officially paid. You can have an academy contract effectively on your 16th birthday, but that doesn't go very far. You can sign your first professional contract at the age of on your 17th birthday, but you only can sign a maximum of 3 years. Right. And I know that those Premier League clubs who view these children as commodities have been pushing to extend that 3-year contract period, because let's say that your birthday was today. You're a player, and you turn 17 towards the end of May 2023. So therefore, if you sign a 3-year contract, that's only going to cover you effectively for the rest of this season and the next 2 seasons, because contracts always expire on the 30th of June. So you could be effectively out of contract in just over 2 years, and therefore you could go to another club. And the bigger clubs in particular don't like the idea of anybody making money out of children apart from themselves. So there is no protection as such. You and I are both aware of the incentivization by certain people in the game towards children, and it tends to be towards the children's parents. And certainly when I've spoken to people, we both got connections. It happens all the time. The kids the kids like the idea of, mum and dad having a better house or a new car. The kid likes the idea of getting a PS5 and a new set of boots on birthday or Christmas. There are various ways of incentivizing without having a formal contract. It does happen, but there is no formal way of giving them protection in a trust account, because they're not actually allowed to earn money as children.
Speaking of PS5, Kieran, and I'm aware this might be the most sad middle-aged thing I've ever asked you, but how are you getting on with the new Zelda game?
It's amazing. I've been ensconced. Well, I wonder how long it will take me to finish it. I don't know.
Yeah, I did my first temple on Friday night.
Oh, did you?
I was so a little lap. The cat was very confused because I don't often do a lap of honour around the house. And I found myself at Fulham yesterday at one stage going, I wonder how do I get to the next one? If I sound a bit croaky, by the way, I'm not still ill. It's just that yesterday was the best away support I've been involved with for any game at Fulham, 90 minutes. So there's a lot of singing going on. And if there are any Fulham fans listening here, make some noise, for the love of God. You've got a Premier League football team that are quite good, a bit divey, but just get behind them, really. Our next question comes from an old friend of ours, Kieran, an American listener, probably our most long-standing American listener. And his question is slightly related to Jonathan Wright's question from earlier about the Premier League. But Mark says, do media outlets in the UK have a contractual obligation to use corporate names on things like stadiums? I've heard that in the US, networks toe the party line so they don't upset the leagues with whom they do business. So it's quite right. The stadium name will always have the name of the sponsor in front of it. So I've noticed in the UK, though, that many outlets refer to the League Cup without naming its energy drink sponsor. But would they risk angering, for example, Brentford by not using the name of its new corporate sponsor for their stadium? When radio and TV stations broadcast from Barcelona, will they just call it the Camp Nou, or will they have to use the name of the streaming service that sponsored it?
I think this is an intriguing one.
Yeah.
I think this is a case of soft pressure is put on.
Yeah.
To me, Spurs play at White Hart Lane.
Yeah.
To me, Coventry City play at the Ricoh. And so on, because it's always that first name, and Spurs are playing at White Hart Lane. And I understand why the club has been working so hard to persuade the media to say the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, because as we've discussed on more than one occasion, the first sponsor is the critical one in terms of value, especially if you're looking for a long-term deal. I don't think there would be any. It's very difficult to force pundits who are themselves don't tend to be employed by the broadcasters. They would tend to have freelance contracts, but the broadcasters themselves will probably be more inclined to toe the party line, because they're also asking the press office for interviews with managers and players. And if the press office turns around and says, "Well, hold on, you've not called it the Wham Stadium. You've been referring it to the Accrington Stanley Stadium, whatever it's going to be." Two can not play ball as well as one. So I think from practical reasons, and why create friction unnecessarily, the media tend to go along with that, but individuals don't tend to take the same approach.
Well, that's a good point, Kieran, because I noticed the BBC and Sky are if you're talking. To me, it's still Griffin Park. But if you're listening or watching a football game, they will say now we're going over to whatever community stadium it is. But it's fans who won't call it that. Brentford fans say, "I'll meet you outside the whatever community stadium it is." They'll just say the ground or. But then again, I don't think the sponsors would care what fans call it to each other, because that's not where the money lies, is it?
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Richard. I'm edgy about one names, but I think the reason why Richard has very cleverly not given his surname is that this question is so up your street that I think Richard was probably worried that you might track him down and try and be his new best friend. So he's kept it just at Richard. Richard, that won't stop him. He'll have a spreadsheet of all the Richards in the world. It's one of those. I'll zone out when you give the answer to this question.
It's okay.
If you don't mind, I'll have a little think about the next temple in Zelda while you're doing this. Richard says, "What does treasury management look like in football?" I'm gone already, Kieran. Do they have cash surplus they invest, or is it more debt management? What will their considerations be for liquidity, exchange rate, interest, and refinancing risk? With large international payments for players, is there a big demand for synthetic forwards, etc.? Is this function likely to be internal or outsourced? I assume this depends on the size of the club. I don't even know if I asked that question properly, Kieran, to be perfectly honest.
You did perfectly well.
What's a synthetic forwards?
It should say that actually said synthetic forward.
I thought that, but then again, it's forwards is probably something in Zelda, so maybe I don't know.
We'll find out in the next temple, won't we?
We will.
With regards to this, Richard, you're very much right. It does depend upon the size of the club and also whether the club is listed and the nature of its activities. So, if we take Manchester United, for example, if you delve into the Manchester United accounts, you do see reference to interest rate swaps because the club is heavily indebted. It also has derivatives, and a derivative is effectively something which is based on the value of something else, such as an exchange rate and so on. And Manchester United, as far as I'm aware, I think they do have their own internal function, but it tends to be from the from the accounts department, they don't pop down the road and find a bunch of rush home ruffians who they'll try to get to do the job for them. When it comes to smaller clubs, there'd be outsourcing, but what I have found is that there is now a whole industry of people providing services to football clubs. So when it comes to overseas transfers, there's insurance policies, there's sub-insurance policies, there are forward exchange rate deals which are taken out to protect the club, and so on. So it is becoming increasingly popular simply because the size of the football industry has increased. It's gone up by 2,800% since 1992, and it wasn't bothering the financial services industry when it started, but now it is. We were talking about financial services earlier with some of the sponsors of clubs. We now have specialist departments at banks who are targeting footballers because they are high net worth individuals, and therefore the bank wants to offer them a suite of services to help them preserve their money, to make sure that we don't end up with another Jackie Coogan situation.
I had a little bet with myself, Kieran, that you'd crowbar rush home ruffians in there somewhere. But I'll be honest with you, I thought you'd go down the cricket club route. I thought you'd manage to find a way to mention the Prowler, and then you'd say he was one of the rush home ruffians. But well done, you just got it in there, slipped it in like a little stiletto. How is the Prowler? Are you still in touch with the Prowler these days, Kieran?
Yeah. We had our Legends game. It's my cricket club's 100th anniversary.
Oh,
wow. Yes, I believe the Prowler was there along with the Slob and Village Idiot and the Size 5 and other such cohabitants of the dressing room. Yeah,
you reach a certain age, Kieran, where it's probably not suitable to be called the Prowler anymore, is it? It's like my mate Penge Penis. It's like it's 60, it's 62. You know our friend of the show, Julian Chenery. We were in the pub yesterday before the Fulham game, which is known in local parlance as the Sloaney Pony, and he introduced me to his friends. Like, this is my friend Edgy, and it's like, I just said to him, "Have you not got any friend who's just got a normal first name? Can he not just go, this is John?" Every single person he introduces me to, and of course, and then all afternoon I'm a bit worried, thinking, why is he called Edgy? He seems all right, and it turns out his first name's Ed, and his second name begins with G. So it's just like Ed.
Right.
So it's like literally one of the worst. But anyway, Edgy seemed like a nice bloke, a bit too fond of Everton. But apart from that, this is yet another reason why we're not getting nominated for BAFTAs, Kieran, because we get so distracted. What was that noise in the background?
That is the Baroness with her Nespresso coffee machine, which means because she always gives Finley a wonky chomp when she gets it. He has a Pavlovian reaction. No matter where he is in the house, as soon as he hears that, off he goes in search of wonky chomps.
Yeah, just for a moment there, I thought Finley had got hold of your manscaping equipment. Our next question comes from David Williams. 3 months ago, I would have suggested that David Williams didn't give his surname because this question would have really annoyed you. He's had one wonky chomp too many by the sound of it. Has he gone over?
Yes, he's very, very giddy.
David Williams says, when Graham Potter moved from Brighton to Chelsea, the numbers bandied around were staggering. If the numbers are true, it seems that Chelsea spent £37 million in changing managers, £15 million compensation to Tuchel, and £22 million compensation to Brighton. This is in addition to the £270 million spent on new signings. Is it possible to tell me how they will be able to comply with FFP for both the Premier League and much stricter UEFA criteria after all this spending? Now, this question, Kieran, and our next question coming up, is an indication that no matter how much we talk about it, our listeners and me still find it hard to get their head around FFP and assume that any club spending huge amounts of money must be breaching FFP regulations.
Yes, well, under Todd Bowley, and as we know, I'm not a member of his fan club.
Indeed.
Chelsea have a very cunning way of getting around the UEFA FFP rules by not qualifying for Europe, which I doff my cap begrudgingly in his direction. Under the UEFA rules, it used to be that clubs were allowed to lose a maximum of €30 million over 3 years. Now, we now are in a transition that 30 million can become 60 million, but we're moving to sort of a soft wage cap as well. As far as the Premier League is concerned, you're allowed to lose 105 million worth over 3 years. What Chelsea are good at are generating huge sums from player sales, £551 million over the course of the last 5 years. And there's two issues with the sale of players. A, how much money do you generate? And B, how much of that money is profit? Now, profit is the difference between the sale price and the amortised value of the player's contract. What Chelsea have been very successful at doing is creating this production line of players from their academy who they then go on to sell. So therefore, there's no amortised value. So it's pure profit. And I think the challenge for Chelsea this summer is clearly they've got to, we're talking football here, but hopefully that won't send people asleep. It will be sort of moving round to the financing. Loftus-Cheek, Hudson-Odoi, Conor Gallagher, Levi Colville, Mason Mount cost Chelsea between them £0. Now, if you sell three of those players for £150 million, that's £150 million, which is immediately offset against their FFP losses. And then when it comes to buying players, we examined this at the time. They're offering players 9-year contracts.
Yeah.
So the cost of buying the players is being spread over a huge period of time. The sales value of the players is being recognised immediately, but also by letting the players go who are coming from the academy, those sales proceeds are also pure profit. So Chelsea, provided they're smart and they let clearly Mason Mount doesn't appear to be overjoyed there. Levi Colwill, there's a place on the south coast waiting for you. You've only got to say the word, young man. He's been very good this season. You sell 2 or 3 of those players, and Chelsea, I think, will be fine, and that will allow them to be within the FFP limits.
Yeah, I have to keep reminding myself, Kieran, that these rules are not about how much you spend; it's about how much you lose.
Yes,
basically, isn't it?
Yes.
As simple as that. Barry Roper has our next question, and it combines two things that exercise our listeners quite a lot. Barry says, I read that when my team QPR signed Taylor Richards from Brighton on loan, the contract included an obligation to buy. Options to buy are commonplace, but is the obligation just a way of kicking a purchase down the line to avoid FFP problems?
Right, Barry. It's not actually. It's there to actually provide protection for all of the parties involved. But they are a relatively new issue, these obligation to buy. An obligation to buy is triggered by a condition in the contract. And that condition, when the contract is signed, is uncertain. So there could have been perhaps 2 obligations to buy as far as the Taylor Richards was concerned. It could be if QPR maintained their championship status, for example, then the condition is triggered, or it could have been linked to the number of appearances, or it could be linked to promotion and so on. QPR did maintain their place in the championship. Therefore, that we say that particular condition crystallises, and therefore the rest of the contract kicks into existence. They are becoming more common. The alternative to that is an option to buy. Let's say that Taylor Richards had an absolutely standout season, and the buyout figure in the contract was $5 million. They trigger it. They buy him for $5 million. And they sell him in the summer for 25. Can you see that sort of gives QPR the option? And if he turned out to be crap, they just say, no, he's a bit crap, goes back to the home club. So it's a way of protecting the selling club to an extent in the contract.
Our final question, Kieran, comes from Stephen Horn. And Stephen starts by saying that he is a lowly supporter of Sheffield Wednesday, which is an indication of how long our waiting list is, because I imagine he's still cock-a-hoop. since.
yes.
What a night that! I mean,
Brilliant.
Peterborough. I've got nothing against Peterborough whatsoever,
No.
but that was an astonishing night. And I don't know if you saw Darren Moore's little pep talk afterwards. He's a man who carries himself well, and that was a fantastic achievement. Sorry, Peterborough fans. But Stephen also adds that he's pushing 50 years of age, probably 55 now in the waiting list. And he says, I appreciate I may be out of the loop, but I've often wondered whilst watching my lads play FIFA computer games why it's only the big clubs that have legends. I'm sure there are plenty of supporters from the not-so-big teams that would love to see their legends represented. I might even pick up my own joystick again if I could purchase David Hurst or Chris Waddle. I've got news for you. I think most computer games have moved on from joysticks, haven't they? Kieran and I are both out of the loop a little bit, except when it comes to Zelda. But if there is a game that's got a joystick out there, and well done for not giggling at the word joystick, Kieran. I congratulate you. Baby steps, one step at a time. It's very good. But it's an interesting question, Kieran, because these games do feature so-called legends. And like you said, there are millions of football fans who don't support clubs who have legends who play these games.
Yes. The reason why there isn't a legends for Sheffield Wednesday, and first of all, and also congratulations. You know, I'm sure I was like many people who after the first leg said, "I know it's over for them," but it wasn't. You know, and they met a great night out, and one which will last in the memory for a long time. It's purely down to sort of supply and demand. The likes of EA will say we have capacity for, say, 400 Legends players. Which teams are going to produce the most interest? It's going to be Manchester United, Barcelona, PSG, Bayern Munich, and so on. And they do it on the clubs that they know are going to generate the most demand. How many Sheffield Wednesday fans of Stephen's age are going to buy a copy of FIFA on the back of having a Legends? It could be measured, perhaps in dozens. Right. And they say, well, first of all, we've got to arrange some form of intellectual payment and intellectual property payment to the player. Then we've got to get a picture of the player, and we've got to do the cell shading. We've got to do the bits and pieces which go into the likeness of the player, and it simply isn't cost effective from the game's producer's point of view. This is a shame, because I'm sure you'd love, Palace, team of the 80s.
I'd love to see any one of the team of the 80s kick Peter Ward all over the pitch in a goal. That'd be, I'd sign up for that without a doubt. Cell shading. Which teenager have you been talking to research this question?
It's all over Zelda, baby.
Do you know what? I'm slightly worried now. I've been thinking about the question we had from Mark Cole about sponsors are not upsetting sponsors. Maybe if this pod's not sponsored by Manscaped, and I've been all over it Manscaped wise. I know we don't do Athletic Greens anymore, but I wouldn't want Athletic Greens to be upset because they'd sponsored it and we were talking about Manscaped. But I'll let producer Guy sort that problem out, Kieran, because that's what he's paid the big bucks for. Our next Price of Football live show will take place at Plymouth Argyle's Home Park Stadium on Tuesday the 6th of June. Tickets are selling very well, but there are still some available from Plymouth Argyle's website. It would be lovely to see you down there. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to join them, that would be very kind of you, and you can do so. Make a small monthly contribution by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you to everybody, and a big thank you to everybody in Newcastle who was so much fun on Thursday night when I took the Baroness up to Newcastle for a Thursday evening date. She was very tolerant.
Was it an anniversary, Kieran? Was it a special trip?
It wasn't. It wasn't. But she joined in as we were staying close to the big market. She's a young lady, but she had her first ever kebab.
Wow!
At first ever kebab. She was a girl afraid before she tried it, but she
was going nowhere fast after she tried it.
Exactly.
What did the Baroness make of her first kebab, Kieran?
It wasn't as bad as I feared, but she left half of it for me, which was even better.
Indeed. Well, coming from the Baroness, not as bad as I feared is the highest of praise, Kieran.
Yes, wow. Absolutely. And anybody who fancies coming along to see us at Plymouth, we had a great time out in Leicester a couple of weeks ago. We're looking forward to seeing you. If you want to support the show in another way, give us a review. It helps us in the charts. It helps us with algorithms. It doesn't matter what you would say. You could even say you would rather the show be presented by Andy Rourke and Johnny Marr, and we'd be so proud of you if you did.
Oh, wouldn't that be good if that could happen? I feel we should dedicate this pod, Kieran, to two Andys. Andy Rourke,
absolutely.
Andy Rourke, who gave us both so much pleasure as young men with his musical talent, and still does with his musical talent, and my dear old mate Andy Smart, who gave me so much laughter and was a big fan of our pod, and is a sad loss to comedy and Farnborough Town. So raise a glass to two Andys, everybody, and we shall see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.